All right, thanks for the opportunity to share with you this morning some of the results of the edge of field work that we've started back in 2010, 2011. And so what I'm going to do today is, one, give you an overview of what some of those findings are. Then we're going to turn our attention to how do they relate to some of the certain practices. We hear a lot about 4R practices, and we're going to look at the data with a broad brush to see how that the data that we have collected right now fits into the 4Rs. What are we learning from that? And then we're going to talk a little bit about some specific practices that we have ongoing, some of the data that we've just started collecting. So, edge of field. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but if you've driven through the landscape, you may have seen these types of systems sitting out in the fields and wondered what they are. This is our typical edge of field site. We have both the surface flow and the subsurface flow captured at most sites. We do have a couple of sites where it's tile only. In those sites, they generally have very large buffers, and we have seen no evidence of surface flow in those fields. We take samples, if water's moving through that system, we record that water, that discharge, on a 10-minute time interval. So we have a pretty good idea of what's coming out of these systems. We also take water quality samples on these. Generally, about every 6 hours, if water's flowing through that, we'll pull a sample from that, and we'll composite that sample either on a day or on an event basis to look at what the effect is of the rainfall. But by and large, we have a pretty good idea now of what's coming off of these fields where we have this type of instrumentation. So where are we operating? These are the locations. The dots are where we currently have this edge of field research site set up. We have 20 paired fields generally across the northwest portion of the state. The pointer doesn't work here on this screen. Over here, but not here. We've got locations in Hancock. The two newest ones are in Hancock and Hardin County. That's part of the demonstration farms, which is that partnership between NRCS and Ohio Farm Bureau. So they just came online back in September of 2016. And then we also have one that's out of the basin. We have or two out of the basin. We have one down next to Farm Science Review at the Beck's facility, if you've been down there, and we also have one in Delaware County. So you can see a lot of our sites are in the northwest portion of the state, in this glaciated region and in this tile drained region of the state. So let's just dive into the data. So what are we learning so far? What's all the data taught us? This is concentrations. This is event mean concentrations, meaning the concentration from that rainfall event. And what I've got plotted here is in the gray bars here is the surface flow, and in the clear bars, the white bars, is the tile flow. The red dotted line in here, that's the Annex 4 concentration that's been recommended. That's that 0.05 parts per million for dissolved phosphorus. So if we look at this, what do we first see is the phosphorus concentrations in the and I guess I don't know why they didn't show up, but on the left hand side is the dissolved phosphorus. The right hand side, the two graphs on the right hand side, are total phosphorus. But the left hand side, if we look at that graph, the concentrations coming out of the tile, the median concentration. Let's talk about this is what we typically call, this is a box and whiskers plot. That means that the line in the middle is the 50th percentile. So we've got 50% of the values above that and 50% below. The box itself is bound by the 25th and 75th percentile, and the whiskers are the 10th and 90th. The dots above and below are the 5th and 95th percentiles. So if we look at this, if we look at what's coming out of the tile, it looks pretty good. We're meeting the 50th percentile, 50% of our event mean concentrations, and that's roughly collectively over our sites about 4,200 rainfall events. Then the tile flow is meeting that threshold 50% of the time right now. That's pretty encouraging. What's not so encouraging is 50% of the values are above that, and we've got some coming out of the tile at 1.25 parts per million. That's high. Those are pretty hot sites. If we look at what's coming across the surface, the median's about 3 times greater than that. So when we hear a lot of negativity regarding tile drainage, I think one of the things we have to be looking at is that water is going to go somewhere. When we have rainfall, it's going to leave the site. We'd rather have that water leaving the site, migrating through the tile, and coming out at 0.05 parts per million as a median, rather than 0.15 parts per million across the surface. Now, that's not to say that tile is our solution. That's not what I'm saying. And we're going to see that in the next graph. And I know this graph is busy. Don't try to focus on all the little bars, but what I do want you to focus on is the black areas in those bars. That's the loading from the tile. We get a lot more loading from our tile than we do the surface generally. More water is going through the tile. So less concentration from tile drainage, but more loading. Now, we know we can't farm in this landscape without tile drainage, but there are some things that we can do to help address these types of large losses. And like I said, again, these values, this is the loading, that red dashed line in this particular graph, that corresponds to that 1/4 pound, that 3.3 kilograms per hectare recommended by Annex 4. That's the loading. That gets us at the 40% reduction. If every farm acre out here was only producing or was below that line, we would meet our 40% reduction. And what's encouraging about this is we have a lot of those producers that are already there. And that's quite encouraging to me. And what we're trying to do now is understand what those producers are doing. We're trying to look at within their management systems, their cropping systems, their soil test phosphorus, those type things. What's characteristic about those that's allowing them to already meet this threshold? And so that's what we're really trying to understand. But do note that tile drainage, we still get our largest contribution from the loading from tile drainage in these systems. Weather plays a role. We know that. Again, this is collectively looking at all of those rainfall events. This is what we call an exceedance probability plot. So on the x-axis, that's the percent of being exceeded. And so if we look at the 20th percentile, again, this is those 4,500 rainfall events that we've recorded. The 20th percentile, so we've got 20% of the time our rainfall events are greater than about 1.25 inches. And that's what we see. Well, with those rainfall events, 40% of the discharge and 40% of the tile contribution to dissolve phosphorus is occurring in those larger events. And likewise in the surface that accounts for about 65 to 70% of the discharge and about 60% of the total loading occur on those events. So how do we store more water in our landscape? If we're talking about these 1.25 rainfalls, 1.5 rainfalls, that's really what we're after. We're trying to identify how we store more water in the landscape to help address the issue. So we raised the question, are farmers, are producers doing a good job of managing their phosphorus? And so what we did, we wanted to create a phosphorus budget, if you will, for the sites. And this is, we've done this on an individual field. I don't have that, I'm not showing that data. What I'm going to show today is the average of all the fields and where we are. So when we think of a phosphorus budget, we think about atmospheric deposition. There's some phosphorus that comes with the rainfall that we cannot control. Then we have what we do control. We can put on our fertilizer, our manures. We can add that into the system. We have phosphorus that we take off in our crop removal, in the grain or the biomass. We see some of this leaving in the surface runoff. And then we have some of it leaching out of the tile or in the tile drainage or leaching down into the deep system, which is generally very negligible, but we do want to quantify how much is leaching out of the tile. And this is all fields. Again, this is all 40 40 of the fields that we have currently where we're collecting data, regardless of rotation, regardless of pea source, placement, timing, any of those things. So that's the way we've decided to look at this data. So let's look at that. So if we look at what's coming out of the atmosphere, we sort of about 1/10 of a pound an acre. That's generally the average of the phosphorus that we get. This is elemental P. It's not P2O5. We're talking about the elemental P that's coming out of the atmosphere is about 1/10 of a pound an acre. So what do we put on? As producers, the producers that we've been working with have been very gracious. They open their management books up and allow us to see what's being applied. And we see that on average it's about 19 pounds an acre is what's being applied. And that's per year. This is on an annual basis. The range is 0 to 100. The 0 obviously is when we don't have a crop growing, or we're applying on a 2-year rotation. It captures that soybean year when we're not applying anything. The 100 likewise is usually a 2-year application. In this particular case, it happens to be a manure application, and I will say that it's pretty high. It's more than what was really needed on the field. The median is 14.7. So our total inputs, what we're putting in, is 19. If we add the atmospheric and what we've got with the fertilizer and manure, we've got 19 pounds an acre that we're putting in. So we start talking about our outputs. This is actual yields when provided. We only had 2 instances, and we're getting that data. We didn't have it. One corn harvest and one soybean harvest. 2 instances where we didn't get those. The producers didn't provide those at the time when we collected the data. So we assumed 160 bushels an acre for corn yield, and we assumed 45 bushels per acre for the soybean yield. So if we look at that, in the crop removal, we're taking about 23 pounds an acre is what we're removing from that crop. And you can see the range anywhere from 0 to 37.5. That 0 represents whenever we would have a stale seed bed out there, we would have a wheat harvest, we'd have a stale seed bed, we would plant corn, but the corn wouldn't come off because this is water year data. So that water year goes from October 1 to September 30th. So you can see where in 1 year there, if we had a stale seed bed, whatever, we would not have necessarily a crop removal. And then we look at what we see in the surface runoff and the tile drainage. And if we look at surface runoff, it's about 2/10 of a pound per acre is what we see coming off. But look at the maximum there, 2.4 pounds an acre in some instances. Is what we're seeing. So we do have some sites that are pretty hot. And then we look at average tile losses. Again, as I said, tile losses generally account for the largest percentage of our phosphorus losses in terms of what's coming out in the water. And we get about 3/10 of a pound per acre there. So if we look at the outputs, just from the surface and tile drainage, we're talking about 1/2 pound an acre is generally what we're losing. But we've got as you can look at there, our maximum is 5 pounds an acre if we look at the maximums on those in the ranges. So our total P outputs, what are we removing from the field? It's about 23.5 pounds an acre. So now let's look at that in this balance. And this is 106 site years of data across these sites. So the atmospheric deposition is, as we said, roughly 1/10 of a pound per acre. We're applying about 19 pounds an acre in our fertilizers. We're removing about 23 pounds an acre in the grain and the biomass. We see about 2/10 of a pound an acre coming out of the surface runoff, and about 3/10 of a pound per acre coming out of the leaching. So that equates to negative 5.1 pounds per acre. So right now, if we say that these producers that we're working with are representative, then we're seeing a drawdown of about 5 pounds an acre of phosphorus. That's encouraging. That means we're not applying too much generally. But if we look at the range down here, again, negative 23 to 29, is where that ranges on an annual basis. And again, keep in mind, weather plays a difference. And if we have a wet year and we're below or above that, and we're putting more on, then we're going to get a lot more off. But in general, this is the average. This is only for sites where we have at least 2 years of data. Right now, it's encouraging, though. We're seeing a drawdown of our phosphorus in the soils right now. So, our producers doing a good job of managing phosphorus. You know, it's a small P losses in the surface runoff and tile drainage relative to the amount. That's what we always talk about. From an agronomic standpoint, this half a pound is negligible. Obviously, we think that from an agronomic standpoint because we're putting on 20 pounds an acre. But it's also that half a pound that's causing the algal blooms in the lake, and that's where we have to be concerned if we're trying to balance that environmental and the agronomic portions. Average crop removal grades are greater than the average amount of B being applied. We are seeing generally that drawdown on an average annual basis. And the P balance is near zero. Inputs are equal outputs, or like I said, we've got a little bit of a drawdown right now. However, good may not be good enough. This is a graph. This was done by this is in the Maumee Basin. This was an article that came out in 2016 where they looked at the accumulation of phosphorus in the basin. And remember, we're near a zero budget. That's where we are on the right-hand side. But look at the accumulation of phosphorus. That's what we call our legacy phosphorus. We have built up phosphorus in our soils to the level now where it's if we turned it off, if we didn't apply phosphorus and we got normal rainfalls, we're still going to have algal blooms. There's that much phosphorus in our system right now. So water quality problems in Lake Erie and other water bodies are going to persist as long as we have this legacy phosphorus issue. And it's going to take a while. At 5 pounds an acre, it's going to take a while to draw that back down to where we don't have this legacy issue. So our aspirational phosphorus budget, we talk about increased yields. You know, by 2050, we're supposed to feed 9.7 billion people. Fertilizers have got to be an integral part of that. They have to be, or we're not going to get there. So how do we manage them? We want decreased losses of our nutrients, especially in the surface runoff and our tile discharge. And we want to be able to do that with adding less phosphorus. Obviously, we don't. That works on your bottom line. We want to have less phosphorus in the system and less inputs for you. How do we get there? One of the ways is the 4R nutrient stewardship, the 4R approach. And this is not a new concept. You've probably been beaten over the head with it over the last 3 or 4 years. But I think it's worth repeating. The 4Rs is that minimum set of practices that we should be doing. Every producer, at a minimum, really to even stay viable, should be implementing the 4Rs. And that's that right source, rate, time, and placement. So as I said, what I wanted to do next is dive into our data, look at our data from in this 4R lens, if you will. So let's talk about fertilizer source. And this is the data from the fields where we're operating. And the top graph is the loading, both the dissolved and the total. And what you see there, again, those are the same box and whiskers plots. But what you see is that those sites where we have organic fertilizers are generally greater, at least trend-wise. If the letters on the top, the A's over the top, says there's no statistical difference in those. But I want to keep in mind that a lot of those have very high phosphorus levels to begin with. The sites where we're operating, it's not that the organic is producing more on a side-by-side comparison. It's the fact that in those instances, they are very high soil test phosphorus sites, 100, 200, 400 parts per million. So what we're capturing there is the history, that legacy phosphorus in those particular instances. So we ask ourselves, what if we apply it on a side-by-side basis? What if we put MAP on a field and we put dairy manure on a field and apply those at the same rate? And that's what's on the bottom graph. And what's interesting about that is if we look at those situations, what we see coming out of the inorganic and the organic is not different at all. is tending to be a little bit less coming out of the organic side than it is on the inorganic. However, it's not statistically different. So if we manage our nutrients, whether it's organic or inorganic, if we manage them and put them on the rates that we're supposed to, and consistent with the 4R, then what we see is there absolutely no statistical difference in the losses. So I think we have to understand. One of my friends says, P is P, a pound of P is a pound of P no matter how you P it. It doesn't matter whether it comes from an organic source or an inorganic source. If we're putting it on at the right rate, we should expect to see similar losses. Let's look at P application. This is the application of all the sites where we're collecting data right now. You can see that the line on there is the tri-state recommendation. Is where that line exists based on the Mehlich 3 soil test level. So you can see a lot of our producers that we're working with, when they do make an application, are below that envelope, if you will. They're on the left side of that. We do have some that are not, and those are producers that we're going to need to work with. You can see about 50%, 60% of those happen to be organic sources. They, especially this one out here on the end at 120 parts per million. Why are we still adding into that site? That's an education thing. Those are things we need to go in and work with those producers. You can see those low levels. That's starter fertilizer. Understand the need for that. I think we need some more research to decide whether it is needed or not. But in these cold, wet soils in April when we're planting, it might be a good thing. But that's what those applications represent. Don't try to look at this in depth. It's a busy graph, but this is looking at the losses and the time of application. The top 4 graphs have to do with time since rainfall. And basically what you see is the hotter colors, the greens, the reds, are on the left-hand side and upward, meaning that the higher the rainfall and the closer to the time since application, the higher the losses that we see. Pretty common sense. And that's why we have legislation now that prevents us from applying within 24 hours of an inch of rainfall. The bottom 2 graphs have to do with the timing of the year. And what we generally see is around the planting time, if we can put it on at planting, that's in the, and this again, I've got this put on here by water year, so that October through September time frame, if we can look at that around May, you can see that's when a lot of it's going on. It's going on at planting. And that's that planting, or when we have the out in August, after wheat harvest, that May, June, July, August time frame is when we have the least potential for losses. We have the largest potential for losses on the ends in the fall and the winter, generally. So it opens up another time for us to, if we can get wheat in the rotation or a small grain. I know there's a big push to try to get some small grains up in this area. If we can do that, and we can use that as a window of opportunity to apply, or apply at planting, our losses generally are less. And then the last of the R's is the placement. And we want to talk about, this is a broadcast variable application on May the 6th of 14. The producer I was standing in the field with, he went in and he said, well, I don't like the looks of that, I'm going to till it in. He tilled one field for us and not the other. So we were able to quantify the impacts. Prior to that tillage event, we can see that both fields were reacting the same, which is the whole idea of the paired design. That's what we want to see out of that. So he tilled one field. He tilled the field on the left. The concentrations that came out of the tile were reduced by 5 times, and the loading was reduced by 7 times. This was a 3-inch disc tillage. We're not advocating tillage. That's happened to be what he did. That's not what we're advocating. What we are advocating is subsurface placement of nutrients. And there are a lot of toolbars on the market right now, and we're not asking you to go buy a toolbar right now. We understand the capital investment in that. But the next time you get ready to replace what you're doing, we do hope that you will consider buying a toolbar that allows you to subsurface place these nutrients in a no-till environment or a reduced-till system. Because this is, if we can get those nutrients 3, 4, 5 inches below the surface, that's when we're going to reduce our losses. And we've got evidence of that with this study, and we're starting to get evidence of that through a couple of our other treatments. So let me comment real quickly about cover crops and no-till. We did have one producer that in 2015 decided he wanted to go and put no-till in the system, and he wanted to use cover crops. After this is 9 months worth of data, sort of what we've looked at so far, we did see that it significantly reduced the amount of water that left the site on the side where we had cover crops, to the tune of about 2.5 inches of water. Remember in the beginning I talked about how do we store more water in our landscape? How do we keep that 1.5 inches more water in there? Cover crops provides us that opportunity to do that. Again, we've seen in this period we've seen 2.5 inches less water leave that site with cover crops. We saw a 96% decrease in the amount of nitrate loss coming out of the tile with the side on the site where we had cover crops as opposed to where we did not. So there's these are good catch crops. They will hold nitrogen. We did not see at this point. We have not seen any differences in the phosphorus though. So we know what works for one nutrient may not work for the other. And in this particular case, again, we did not see any difference in phosphorus. But they can increase organic carbon, and in that organic carbon, for every % we increase that, we can store about 3/4 of an inch of water. That alone will help us to get to that, how do we keep water in our landscape. It takes time, and we're talking about every 8-9 years in order to double our organic matter. But if we can do that, we'll see. I think we will see a big difference in the amount of water that leaves the site and the amount of nutrients that leave the site. Frank, this was the first year. This was a first year. He was a till every year person. Not whatsoever. That's right. That's right. No, this was a first year. That's 9 months worth of data that we've looked at for that so far. We've got another 3 months. I just haven't looked at it, Steve. So he put soybeans in. This was cereal rye. He put soybeans in on the cereal rye. Now, what I do have to say is that he ended up feeling that his stand wasn't good enough. He killed that field and replanted it. I wished he had put some strips out there because I think they would have caught up. But we didn't do that. So this is a soybean crop. So that's both actually. We didn't see any difference in either one on the DRP at this point. So
and a question back here, Kevin.
Yeah.
If you have less water discharge, why wouldn't there be a difference in the dissolved reactive phosphorus?
Lodi, that's a great question. We're not sure yet. It was a little different. And when we talk about difference, we generally talk about statistical. I think it was 0.5 and 0.4 or whatever was the difference. It wasn't statistically different. There was a little decrease, but that's a great question. We don't know for sure yet why. So where are we going? Greg and I have been out talking to the producers where we're ready to go right now. These are the treatments that we're currently this calendar year or this growing season getting ready to look at. We've got gypsum as a surface amendment, fall versus spring application, both using organic and inorganic sources. We've got a producer looking at rate for us, a half rate of fertilizer versus a full rate of fertilizer. Drainage water management, obviously, is one of the things that we're interested in. Multiple versus single applications. This is with the manure people. We're putting sorghum sudan in a site, and so that allows it to open up some window. We can make 2 or 3 applications then during the season, rather than putting it solely on silage corn after harvest. We've got a producer that's looking at drawdown, where he's actually putting alfalfa in the system. So we're going to be able to start seeing if we can pull down the soil test levels, as well as by removing that biomass, and seeing if we can actually reduce the amount that comes out of the tile as well, and the surface. We've got conventional versus a no-till or reduced till system, looking at both organic and inorganic sources. We have a producer that's looking at banding versus the broadcast application for us. Supposed to have happened last fall. Unfortunately, the weather didn't cooperate, so we are going to ban that with the planter this spring and still do the broadcast application this spring. The cover crops versus no cover crops, we're wanting to extend that. We've got another producer that's going to hopefully help us with that. And then looking at this idea of wood chip bioreactors and steel slag filters on the edge of the field to try to quantify those impacts. I saw a hand. Did you have a question?
You referenced one site in 2014 with side-by-side tillage, and you related that back to deep placement. Do you have any deep placement side by side?
No, that's what we were supposed to start this fall. Not at this point. That's what we will be doing. That's the only placement one that we have at this point. We've got two that are started, but we don't have any data on them at this point.
I guess there's a lot of us that have a lot invested in reduced tillage and no tillage, and we'd really like to see that versus talk about a 3-year-old trial on one farm and just talk about tillage in general.
Yeah, I totally understand that, and I agree with you. So the banding versus broadcast, the one site where we have, that's a guy that's no-tilled for 30 years. And so we're going to continue, we're going to do a placement there versus the broadcast on that particular site. I agree with you. We need to have more data like that. You're right. The data is a little old on the one study, and we're trying to get that updated as we go. Mark,
are there still slag filters for tile discharge or surface runoff?
The ones that we are doing are for tile discharge. There are with the demonstration farms or with the project that Andy Ward has, there are a couple that are going to, I think, are surface related. One of those will be, I think, at one of the demonstration farms as well. But ours are the two that we're putting in are going to be related to tile drainage probably. So, yes, sir.
Are you relating this back to the OSU disc program that's going on? Is that relating at all to this? Are you seeing results that look similar with similar practices?
We hope to. I've been working with Greg on that. We hope that that disc data is going to supplement what we're finding here to give us some more evidence of the impacts of these practices. We're not at that point right now, but that is the intent. You're standing there. Am I supposed to be sitting down?
To give you the hook.
All right. All right. Well, all right. So I'll try to.
I like you too, but
Yeah, I know. All right. I'll hurry up here. So I was winding down. So conclusions. There are no smoking guns out here, but in the same sense, there are no silver bullets either. It's going to take a multifaceted effort in order to solve this problem. What works for one producer may not work on another, so we've got to keep that in mind. Producers are generally doing well, but improvements can be made. We can all make improvements. Due to the legacy P, water quality problems are going to persist for quite some time. Accelerated water management. We talk about water management. We've got to have water management as well as P management to address the issues. At a minimum, every producer should be implementing the 4 R's in some form or fashion. Creating field-level P budgets and following those 4R practices, we feel, will lead to less losses and less inputs on your side as well. Don't know if that can be seen in the back. I do have to acknowledge the funding sources for this. A lot of different organizations have been a part of this over the years. And so NRCS has been carrying the biggest load, and as well as we've been doing with our ARS budget. But I do have to send out shout out a thank you to all of our funders on this project. And then just to let you know that I'm the spokesman a lot of times. We have a great team of people that help us. We do cover on a weekly basis 19 counties, about 1,300 miles, and about 300 or 400 water samples every week. we don't really drive that fast. So that's a broken speedometer, but it was a great picture. So, but we do work really hard and we do work fast, and it's a great group.